I see my first guest on the line. Just pumped up for this guy. I've been a fan of him for over 30 years. Guys, I'm going to play a great song from this drummer. This is the Jelly Jam, the album, Prophet. Great kick-ass song called Memphis with Rod Morgenstein on drums.
And now back to Around the Kit with Joe Gansas.
Guys, we are back, 646-787-8027. Really, really cool feel there. Guys, it gives me so much tremendous pleasure to welcome to Around the Kit, the great Rod Morgenstein. Rod, Joe Gansas, Around the Kit. How are you, brother?
I'm doing amazing. How are you?
Oh, I like the way you said that, bro. That makes me feel good, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Just a treat to have you on the show. You know, two New York guys here, Rod, just talking drums. It don't get better than that.
That's awesome.
I live in Staten Island, by the way. I know you're up north, right? Are you?
No. I'm on the island.
Oh, great. Yeah, I'm on Staten Island. You're on Long Island. Great, guys.
Yes.
Guys, welcome to the show, the great Rod Morgenstein. Rod, thank you so much. When I start my interviews, I like to paint a picture a little bit. I like to go back, you know, born in the early 50s. You take a liking to the drums. You know, what was going on in the early stages as a young boy with Rod Morgenstein and the whole evolution of drums?
It all started for me on a Sunday night when me, my sister, and my parents were all huddled around the black and white TV, and Ed Sullivan said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles." And so that was it. I never looked back. You know, I grew up in a very musical household. My mom, when she was younger, played some violin, and she's very outgoing, and there was always music of some kind playing in the house, whether it was, you know, Broadway show music or classical music or popular music. And so from the moment they saw how, you know, turned on my head and inspired I was when I saw the Beatles, and then I expressed an interest in wanting to learn to play the drums. They were 100% supportive, and to this day, both of my parents, who are 93 years old, never miss a concert when I play in New York. In fact, they were at B.B. King's last month when the Jelly Jam played on August 26th, I believe it was.
That's great. That's great,
Yeah.
brother.
Great
But
it really did start with that night in February 1964 when the Beatles made the first appearance on that television show. And for whatever reason, I identified with the drumming. And so Ringo was my first, influence and idol. And then from there, the late 60s was just an unbelievable time. Certainly, in hindsight, when you can look as a historian about things that were going on in culture. So, like, the Beatles turned, pop music on its head, and then not long after that, or along with the Beatles, was the British explosion and all these amazing bands coming over. And then, within a year or two, well, maybe not a year or two, but maybe 4 years later, Jimi Hendrix and Cream came on the scene, and both of those bands, again, just, lit me on fire, I mean, to this day, I would probably say if I had to pick one drummer, it would be Mitch Mitchell. Although I certainly, could rattle off a list of names of people that had an incredible influence on me, but Mitch Mitchell seemed to be like the granddaddy of fusion music and, bringing this whole, jazz methodology to the rock world. Everything was experimental back then because rock was in its infancy. Nobody knew what was going on, and so there were no rules. There was no rule book. Record labels weren't telling anybody how to do it. And so there was all this diversity in the music back then. And then not long after Hendrix and Cream, then Led Zeppelin and Jethro Tull hit the scene. So I was into all of those bands. And, as young as, say, maybe 16 years old, I was going into the city to the Fillmore East, who every week had these bands playing. I wish, looking back on it, that I took more advantage of it because, 1 week you could go see Jimi Hendrix, the next week Cream, the next week the Doors, the next week the Rolling Stones, just keep going.
Yeah.
So
that's great stuff. Guys, we're talking to the great Rod Morgenstein. Rod, I've interviewed over 100 guests on the show so far, guests like you, world-class guests, and so many of them, Rod, mentioned Ringo and the Beatles. Was it what Ringo didn't do that was really, amazing to us? The things he didn't do, I mean, we always say what a drummer does, but maybe it's stuff that Ringo didn't do that made it so special,
I get you could say that, but for me, it's not so much that as it was this indescribable personality that his drumming had. And really, when we think of the Beatles, they're the only band in history, I think, that we refer to as John, Paul, George, and Ringo. You know what I mean? On a first name basis. Like with Led Zeppelin, you wouldn't say Jimmy, Robert, John, and John Paul. But certainly it's John, Paul, George, and Ringo. There's something about his drumming that just had such an individual sound. Look, people have argued the merits of Ringo Starr to death for the last umpteen years, and people who are just totally sold on chops and four-way independence and that whole thing and speed will say I don't think Ringo's much of a drummer, but that gets into the whole discussion of what does make a musician special or make a musician great. And so we all, I think, have different impressions on what that is. So to me, like a great musician is someone who reaches you on that deep level that music can. And quite frankly, for me, a lot of times the technique and the independence and the who's the fastest guy in the world, that doesn't necessarily reach me on a deep level.
Right.
I appreciate it because, being a musician and being a drummer, I understand the untold hours of practice and just, shutting yourself in a room with a pad or your drum set, like what you have to put into it to be able to achieve those things. But to me, the ultimate goal should be touching people's hearts. And so, that's where Ringo comes in. So, sure, of course he's not a technician.
Right.
He'd probably be the first one to say he's not a technician.
Yep.
But also, another thing about him in particular is that, we could rattle off a handful of Beatles songs that could be identified by the drum groove. So, if you heard the beat to Ticket to Ride or Come Together, you just hear the drum stuff, and you will identify the song immediately. So to me, that's a measure of really, really true brilliance.
Yes, Rod. And guys, we're talking to the great Rod Morgenstein. You brought up chops before. On this show, I talk about IX drums, about chops and players, and I don't like when we compare, like we'll say, oh, Neil Peart is a better drummer than Phil Rudd from AC/DC. Well, because we're hearing things differently. I think we always try to categorize drummers as one better than the other because we're hearing somebody doing things. My question to you is, can somebody be a great drummer, Rod, without great chops?
My answer is, yeah, of course.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
Imagine, I hate to even use Neil Peart's name because I consider him, like in the drum community, a friend.
Right.
He's an incredible human being. In addition to being, an incredible drummer. But what would AC/DC sound like with Neil playing their music? So that's the question. So for Rush fans, they would probably like AC/DC more. But, to me, in the case of a band like AC/DC, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. To me, Phil Rudd is the perfect drummer for AC/DC.
Absolutely.
And I wouldn't want to hear a drummer that has incredible chops playing with them. It would.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. There's a reason why bands sound the way they do and why certain genres of music sound the way they do, and it's because you don't use the same, like in the case of a drummer, you don't use the same rhythmic elements in all styles. You know what I mean? So, Buddy Rich is considered by many to be the greatest, let's say the greatest jazz drummer that ever lived. Well, what would Buddy Rich have sounded like in AC/DC?
Yep.
I think he would have ruined the band. Okay, so now am I dissing Buddy Rich? No, of course not. But in the jazz world and in the big band, genre within the jazz world, there was nobody better than Buddy Rich. But I would say in AC/DC, there's nobody better than Phil Rudd.
Yeah, great point. We just mentioned Neil, and I wanted to ask you, I think back in 85, 86, you were playing with the Steve Morse Band, and you guys actually were on tour with them for 3 months. How was that on the Power Windows tour? How was that for you, and the band?
Yeah, it was an extraordinary experience. First off, just in terms of the excitement for us meeting Neil, Alex, and Geddy, just because of their stature in the music world, was an incredible experience. And all three of them were total gentlemen and welcomed us onto the tour. And, we all got to mingle together, and I got to know Neil very well, and I got to know Alex really well. I mean, Getty very well, and Alex to a lesser extent. But, over the years, Neil and I have stayed in touch at various times. And then, when he put together the Burning for Buddy album, trying to, honor the music of big band and, in particular, Buddy Rich, and he thought with his celebrity he could bring the music of the big band eras to a larger audience, And in fact, just today, I just came from a day of kayaking on the Carmen River out on Long Island, and one of the people that I was kayaking with, I just met him today for the first time. He's a guitarist, and he's a fan of some of my bands, and he was at one of the recent Jelly Jam concerts, and he was asking me about the Burning for Buddy CD, because he said, I bought the Burning for Buddy CD, and I said, oh, are you like into jazz? And he said, I don't know anything about jazz, but Rush has been my favorite band, and when I was reading somewhere back 20 years ago or so, whenever it came out, that Neil Peart put together this project, he said, I immediately ran out and bought the CD. So that was Neil's intention, to try to turn on Rush fans or, rock and roll fans to this totally other kind of music. And I was talking for like an hour today to this guy, telling him Neil Peart stories and Rush stories, just because he's such a huge fan. But, so for me, having been part of that, the Burning for Buddy recording experience, and then with the Steve Morse Band, like you mentioned, doing 3 months of the Power Windows tour back in 85 and 86, there are a lot of Rush and Neil Peart stories.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
So he was entertained.
Yeah.
It was a fun day.
Guys, great Burning for Buddy. Don't forget, Rod Morgenstein is on a track called Machine. It's one of my favorite albums. Simon Phillips, everybody's on there. My guest last week, Kenny Arnoff, was on there, and Rod does a great job on Machine. If you haven't ever picked it up, pick it up. Burning for Buddy, a tribute to Buddy. Guys, 646-787-8027 with the great Rod Morgenstein. Rod, you've been playing for years and years and teaching and conveying drums to drummers. Do you take a different approach, Rod, when you're behind the set, playing and in front of a student teaching? Is there a different approach you take?
Well, teaching is a different thing than performance, but I've been teaching at Berklee College of Music for, I'm in my 19th year.
Nice.
It starts in a week from now. And so I make this, 245-mile trek to Boston 30 weeks a year, which is, I've probably passed the 300,000-mile point in terms of the driving and stuff. But, I try to teach through my years of being a recording and touring musician, as opposed to having a student open a book to page 1 and, all right, for next week you'll do page 1 and the following week you'll do page 2 and page 3. I've learned some interesting things in the 40-some-odd years of being a professional musician, and, not everything in books necessarily holds true in real life. So I tried to teach the kinds of things that will help somebody when they get out in the real world and try to make a career as a musician. So, is it important to, learn to play every permutation of a paradiddle, or if there's a book on, funk drum grooves that that are combinations of eighth notes and sixteenths. Is it important, to learn how to play 1,000 different grooves, many of which don't even sound musical, but because say a computer can spit out 1,000 different ways to combine eighth notes and sixteenths, should you spend the time practicing all of them? So maybe on one level, sure, why not? How could it hurt? But everybody has a limited amount of time, say, that they can devote to the practicing of the drums. And so to me, it would be more like, hey, here are the 50 out of those 1,000 that I've actually heard somewhere, and they seem to, recur time and again on one song or another. So why don't we work with the things that are relevant to what you actually will hear on a record or in real life, as opposed to, here's the other 950 beats that most non-drummers are going to tell you can't play.
Mm-hmm.
So,
absolutely, yeah.
And
I get it.
so like, here's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. I remember in college, I took a class on like studio recording, and I remember in the book it said, okay, now when you look at the 2 meters, the left and right channels, make sure that the meters never go into the red. You want them. You see where that 0 is? When it's there, it's perfect. Okay, great. So that's what the book said. All right. So then, several years later, I find myself with the Dixie Dregs recording our second album, What If, and we're so excited because we're working with one of the most prolific engineers, producers of the time, by the name of Ken Scott, who had been the lead engineer on the Beatles' White Album, and then he went on to engineer and produce the Mahavishnu Orchestra albums and Billy Cobham's Spectrum album, the Breakout album, and Stanley Clarke's School Days album, his debut album, and Jeff Beck, There and Back, and on and on and on and on and on and on. Elton John, Supertramp, David Bowie, Spider from Mars. So here's this guy who'd been around the block for umpteen years and been responsible, in part, for the sales of millions and millions of records. So here we are, young guys to the business doing our second album. And I remember being in the control room one day, and I saw, the meters were pinned. They were beyond the red, all the way just like they were about to pop through the glass,
Right.
And I said, Ken, the meters, look, and he goes, so, what about them, Rod? I go, in school, I learned that, the meters are supposed to be at the 0 point. You don't want them in the red. And he looked at me and he said, do you like what you're hearing through the speakers? I said, I love it. It sounds amazing. And he goes, screw the books. Who cares? Use your ears.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm sure the book that you were studying out of was well-meaning, and there's probably a lot of worthwhile information in it. But at the end of the day, trust your instincts and use your ears. So that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, great stuff. Rod, we're talking about teaching. I had to do this because he's a friend of mine, and we live on Staten Island together. You taught a guy named John Camerado, and I invited John on for a second just to say hello. John, you're on with Rod Morgenstein, one of your old teachers. Say hello.
Hey, Rod. How you been, man?
Good, man. How are you?
Good. I don't know if you remember me back in the days of the Collective many years ago on 14th Street. I was one of your students.
Okay, wonderful.
And, I was this, total prog snob kid that just wanted to learn how to play in 17/16. And it was in the inception of you joining Winger.
Right.
And we sat down in the room, and I was like, Rod, can you teach me all this crazy stuff? I want to play all these Cobham licks, and I want to learn all these crazy Zappa things. And you sat me down, and you said, listen, I'll show you how to do some of that stuff, but I want to teach you the importance of playing a solid backbeat on 2 and 4 and nailing that bass drum on 1 and 3. And I'll never forget these words, and I carry them now 30 years after. And making every note sound like the last one you'll ever be heard for. And these things have stayed with me for years. And, you showed me all the really cool stuff, which was great. and demystified the black page for me, because I thought it was in some crazy time signature. And you were like, no, John, it's in 4/4 with these odd groupings played over, And it was like, oh, wow, But unbelievable stuff I was taught. You were one of the best, easiest going, easy to understand teachers I've ever had in my years of playing. It's just an honor to speak to you again.
Thank you so much for all those nice words. I really do appreciate it. The reality of being a drummer is that in most playing situations in the rock world, the things that we think are so cool as drummers are not necessarily thought of as cool to guitarists, bass players, vocalists, keyboard players.
Yep.
And until a drummer recognizes the fact that what I call this handful of tried and true kick snare patterns, with a ride pattern on top of it, until we recognize the importance of them and the beauty, the simplistic beauty, and the fact that these cliche beats have been used since the earliest beginnings of rock and roll and continue to be used. If you don't recognize that and gain some sort of appreciation for them and feel good about playing them, your phone is really not going to ring.
Mm-hmm. I remember that very well.
you will find yourself being an unemployed musician. It's one thing, to show some really cool stuff like you're talking about at a drum clinic, because drummers are at drum clinics and they're into that stuff. But the unfortunate reality is that the rest of the world would rather just tap their foot in 4/4 time and clap their hands, along with the snare on 2 and 4. That is the world, and so you kind of have to get your priorities in order. If it's all or nothing at all, that's fine. If it's like, no, man, this is what I do. I do this very esoteric, really weird, super intricate stuff. I would say, well, good for you. And as long as you don't play the victim and hold a grudge against the rest of the world because, you're a starving artist, I'd say go for it, because it's all about, following your passion. But, my advice to someone who says, I don't really want to work for a living, I just want to be a musician, or I just want to play my drums, I would say, okay, so, keep that passion going for that crazy, over-the-top, intricate stuff, but also have a little bit of respect for what you're hearing on the, billion or two other songs that are circulating around the world. Like, if you don't, it's going to be trouble.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
Very true.
John, I thank you. Rod, just to let you know, John has been talking about you for years, how he's definitely been your favorite drummer. I just wanted to tell you that he's not blowing smoke. He always tells me that, and I wanted to bring him on today just to say hello to you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's so nice to hear from you, man.
Yeah, man, it's 30 years, and you left an impression, man. I got to tell you, and that says something. And
wow.
Still 52 years old and still trying to play some drums, and always referring to you as one of the major influences in my drumming. And
I really appreciate
enough,
I really appreciate that. And yeah, just there's no reason to ever stop playing.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, man. Like you said, the passion is still there. That's why I'm doing it.
Wonderful.
Well, John,
right.
John, thanks so much for calling, bro. Thanks, man.
Thank you for the opportunity, Joe. Thanks again, Rod. All the best, man. Nice talking to you.
Thanks. Same here.
Okay.
That was John Cameron. We guys did a great Rod Morgenstein. Rod, I had a question from a caller, and it's the question like this. Throughout your career in a number of musical settings, you always seem to find opportunities to create some really unique and rhythmically out stuff, like the fill in Not Today by the Jelly Jam and the intro to Calcutta by the Dixie Dregs being two of my favorites. Are these moments, Rod, encouraged or requested by other musicians in the case of these two? And could you explain exactly what is going on with these two?
Okay. In the case of those two songs, no, they were just things that I came up with, and then I got the nod from the guys, like, hey, pretty cool, nice.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Nobody said, what, are you out of your mind? No way. First off, it's really great when you're fortunate enough to be in a band playing with musicians that are somewhat open-minded, and not just, wrapped around a specific thing. So, in the case of, playing with Ty Tabor and John Mayung with the Jelly Jam, it's kind of like anything is fine. Whatever you do is fine. With that particular song, Not Today, which actually, it was in the set, when we did this short East Coast tour last month. I think the lick that this person's talking about it happens during the verses. In this particular song, there's this riff that goes. Then there's a break for two measures, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. Then the riff. So, let's see. And so during the breaks, those two measures of there not being a guitar riff, it's just the drums that are playing. Mm-hmm. And then Ty is singing. Well, he's not really singing in this song. He's sort of talking over it. And so, with the exception of this one lick that I'm going to explain, the rest of the time I'm just sort of going, so it's really wide open in terms of what I'm playing, but I'm keeping the backbeat on 2 and 4, and I'm filling in on tom-toms and open hi-hat on the rest of it. But this one time, instead of just doing a I'm playing, it's actually a paradiddle, and I'm doing a certain kind of a lick where let me try to explain it. So for the drummers who are out there, which I assume everybody is, so imagine you're playing a paradiddle the most basic way. So the first note is on the floor tom, and then the next 3 notes are on the snare, right? So it's boom, da, 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 like paradiddle. And then the next paradiddle, which your left hand is open, you hit the rack tom on 1. And then instead of the next 3 notes being on the snare, the note after the rack tom is being played on a lower rack tom. So you're going doom, snare, 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 rack, rack, snare, snare. Doom, doom, but I'm not playing 16th notes. This is where the weirdness comes in. A paradiddle is a 4-note lick. Right, left, right, then left, right, left, left. And so everybody learns to play a paradiddle like right, left, right, left, left, left. 1 E and a, 2 E and a. But not a lot of drummers then try to step it up and do something weird with it, manipulating it, where instead of playing each note as a 16th note, I took it and made each note of the paradiddle an eighth note triplet. All right? So, triplets sound like 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. But if you play a paradiddle where each note of the paradiddle is an eighth note triplet, it's going to sound paradiddle, 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 paradiddle. Not paradiddle, 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 but paradiddle, paradiddle, paradiddle. So that's what I'm doing in Not Today, in those two measures that this person is asking about.
Right.
Right. And so, as far as Calcutta, I have not heard the song really since I recorded it, probably 20 years ago, and so I can't even hear it in my head.
Right.
So I can't respond to it. But I will say that I remember the moment of recording that particular song and how difficult it was and how many tries it took me, because I just wasn't feeling it right. And I really remember it because there was someone not in the band or at the recording studio, an outside person who was invited to the session, and I was so embarrassed that I was having all this trouble getting the drum track done. So, in all my years of recording the 50 or 60 albums that I've done and hundreds of songs, that is like definitely in the top 5 of the hardest things I ever had to record.
Wow.
But I don't remember it at all.
Great, that's great stuff. That question came to us by Mr. Greg Jones from Staten Island. Guys, we're talking to the great Rod Morgenstein. Rod, we're doing so much in life. Life is fast. We're both from New York. We know how it is here. It's crazy. We always want to do, and then even musicians, we always want to do and do and do. How important, Rod, is it sometimes to just listen to everything around us and absorb it?
Oh my God! Listening is everything. Mm-hmm. It's where you learn to become sensitive to things and cross that bridge of going from people calling you a drummer to a musician. Mm-hmm. We all know that the majority of musician jokes are drummer jokes, and they start with, "Hey, what do you call the person that hangs around musicians?" The drummer, and so, sometimes there are maybe little truths hidden or in stereotypes or reasons why there are so many jokes, and I think part of it is because drummers, being the rhythm makers of music, have little to no understanding of the other two major components that make up music, which are melody and harmony. Mm-hmm. And so, when you kind of open up your ears and try to focus in on the other things that are happening around you, amazing things can happen. It will make you start thinking more like the total musician than just the guy who's laying down the groove, and it might help you play a little bit more musically than just bashing things out.
Great stuff. Rod Morgenstein, I can't thank you, brother. I got one more question for you before I let you go. Rod, you played with some great bands over the last 30 or almost 40 years now, from the Dixie Dregs to the Great Winger, my God. You played with Fiona, the Jelly Jam. You recorded with all these great artists. Rod, my question to you is, if you could do it all over again, if you could do it all over tomorrow, would you take the same path and just mimic your career, or would you want to be in one band that's the best band in the world?
No, that's a great question. I was a piano player before I was a drummer, because I told you, growing up in a musical family, at a very young age, my parents enrolled me in the cultural workshop in our town, and so I was learning to play the piano, and then when I saw the Beatles on the TV show, that kind of changed everything. I have, over all these years, come back to the keyboard, and when I went to college, I studied with the jazz piano teacher at the college. I was more of a piano player than drummer, really, in terms of my curriculum, because I was always baffled by what is going on in jazz in terms of what the piano players are doing. They're playing all these amazing sounding chords with, they weren't like, triads. In the jazz world, the harmonic components go much deeper than in rock. And so, in answer to your question, there's always been a part of me that has thought, like, if I did it all over again, I wonder if I might go the path of being a piano player, because keyboards they're a more all-encompassing instrument, because with being a piano player and then getting into synthesis, you're really a one-person army, and you could phone in your stuff in with technology where it is today, not even ever get out of your pajamas, and be creating symphonies in your apartment or in your home. So, that's a thought that I have sometimes. But in terms of, the drumming aspects of what my career has been, I don't know I have to backtrack. I thought that the Dixie Dregs was going to be my only band, for my 50 or 60 years of being a musician, however long that I lived, because, we all met in college, got out of college, and said, one for all for one, let's go for it. Even though we play this instrumental, esoteric music, we think it's the greatest music on the planet. So I think I would have been totally happy had the Dixie Dregs still been together and never have, parted ways. But the fact that it did kind of break up for a while before it had gotten back together again, I feel like the luckiest guy on the planet that I then, met Kip Winger and Reb Beach and Paul Taylor and got to be part of that whole Winger experience, which is, I don't want to say the antithesis of the Dixie Dregs, but, going from an instrumental rock jazz fusion band into like a heavy metal band was an amazing challenge in terms of not wanting people to say, what the hell is a fusion drummer doing in a rock band? I wanted people who didn't know my background with the Dixie Dregs to just think, hey, what a cool rock drummer, but he also throws these curves in now and then, and then, to kind of follow it along, I also play in a band called Jazz is Dead, which is a jam band that jams on the music of the Grateful Dead. Billy Cobham was the original drummer, and I replaced him, and have had the good fortune of being able to play with the bass player Alphonso Johnson, who's been the bass player for most of the time with Jazz is Dead. And, I used to go see Alphonso Johnson when he played in Weather Report and the Billy Cobham George Duke Band. And, he's this illustrious bass player in the jazz world. And so in Jazz is Dead, the approach is not like the Dixie Dregs or Winger. It's kind of like make it up as you go along and dig down deep, find out who you are as a musician, take every chance in the world, fall on your face, because only by falling on your face will you really find what you're made of and come up with some of the most unbelievable stuff. And then from that there's the Jelly Jam, which is however you want to describe that band. And then there's also the duo that I have with Jordan Rudess, the Rudess Morgenstein Project, which is this, instrumental, crazy, over-the-top, proggy stuff. So, so for me, the challenge has been trying to sound authentic within the styles of each of those bands. To have people say, God, what a great prog drummer, or wow, what a great, jam band guy, or what a great fusion drummer or rock drummer. Beyond that, I really do feel fortunate that I've had and continue to have the opportunity to play with such amazing musicians.
Just great stuff. Rod Morgenstein, I cannot thank you enough, brother. Before I forget, I got to thank the great Mike Vanderhoel for getting us together. Mike is a great drummer, and he put us together, so I thank Mike Vanderhoel. Rod, at the end of my interviews, I ask my guests one question, and an honest answer is all that I ask. Rod, on a scale of 1 to 10, brother, rate this interview honestly.
On a scale of 1 to 10, in all honesty, I can't imagine it being any better than it was. So I have to give it a 10. You sound like a really lovely human being. You ask really good questions, and there was nothing dumb about it, So
I like that. There was nothing dumb about it. That's good. Thanks, brother.
It was dumb free.
Rod, anybody who wants to get a hold of you, give us a website. I know they're out there, but just let us know where they can get you.
Well, let's see. I don't have any place to reach me on rodmorgenstein.com, but I do have a Facebook page. I just don't know how you find the right one, because there are 2 or 3 of them. But just try, Facebook / Rod Morgenstein, or I think you can just search that way.
Great. Rod, I can't thank you enough, brother. I hope down the line we could do this again. You're a gentleman and a world-class drummer. My next guest, the great Jason Bittner, he wanted to say hello to you. He just wanted me to throw it out there. So,
that's awesome. Yeah, please tell him hi. He's also a great guy and a monster drummer.
Yeah. But we've been so fortunate for the last 45 minutes to talk to you, Rod, and we will continue to follow you, brother, on your drumming and musical journey. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you very, very much, Joe. I really appreciate it.
All right, have a great night.
All right, you too. Take care.
Guys, the great, legendary Rod Morgenstein. Just people have told me this guy was a beautiful human being. Just even better than that. He's a tremendous person and just one of the best drummers you'll see. Thank you, Rod Morgenstein. Guys, 646-787-8027. My next